Good evening, everybody. I'm Beth Green, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Martha's Vineyard, I'd like to welcome the candidates and the viewing public to our virtual candidate forum for the town of Chilmark. The League of Women Voters is a strictly nonpartisan organization. It neither supports nor opposes candidates for the office of any level of government. We do support issues. Our mission is to improve our systems of government and impact public policies through citizen education and advocacy. And it is to that end that we host forums to inform voters as they prepare to cast their ballot. In response to continued uncertainty about COVID restrictions, we have organized a virtual forum again this year. We've invited candidates in contested races to speak to all the voters in a safe environment. We certainly hope that we can host all the candidate forums in person in 2023. As a result, the moderator and candidates are Zooming again this year. The only contested race in Chilmark is for the Finance Committee, which is a 3-year term. We have 3 candidates this evening. They are, in alphabetical order, Mr. Eric Glasko, Ms. Susan Murphy, and Mr. Bob Rosenbaum. Each candidate will have 5 minutes to share their views with voters in an opening statement. Our timekeeper will hold up a card to alert the candidates when 1 minute is remaining and when it is time to stop. The opening remarks will be made by the candidates in alphabetical order by last name. In the absence of a live audience or the ability to utilize the chat function, we do not have an opportunity for voters to pose questions tonight. We have received questions from the public by email and will ask each candidate for a brief response. Responses will be kept to a maximum of 3 minutes to allow us time for a number of questions. I'll mix up the order in which candidates respond to these questions. Following the questions, the candidates will have time for brief closing remarks. Now let's get started with the candidates' opening remarks. We will begin with Mr. Eric Glasko.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Glasko, and I am a candidate for re-election for the Chilmark Finance Committee. I have previously served 2 terms as a member of the Finance Committee. A little bit about me personally. I'm live obviously a Chilmark resident. I live here in Chilmark with my wife, Molly. I have 2 boys, one of them is in college, one's still in high school, and my wife and I own and operate the Gray Barn here in Chilmark. In terms of views on the Chilmark Finance Committee, it's been an interesting 6 years. It's been, I would say, a learning curve as I've come to understand the role and the goals, so to speak, of the committee. As time has gone on, I think that the Finance Committee in general has adopted the general view that the town departments, we sort of go through a process of reviewing the requests of the town departments, and we act as sort of a, I would say, as a exercise some judgment and advise the town and the voters on what we think are the best courses of action for the town. I think the town going forward is at a more interesting place than it has been. The town is facing a number of upcoming major expenditures for capital programs, the new fire station, the likelihood that we'll be facing the cost of a new high school in the coming, 5 years anyway, plus significant outstanding issues, mostly centered around pension and other sort of retirement obligations faced the town. I think that I bring a pretty unique view to the town. I have a background in both in the farming business, running my own business, and I also was an international oil trader for 15 years before we moved to the island and started doing this. I would say that's more or less it in a nutshell. I personally, philosophically, am a little bit focused on the town historically has basically been, we have the luxury of having a comparatively low tax rate And therefore, we haven't faced as much budget pressure as maybe some of the other island towns have in past years. I think that's probably something that we're going to be under some more pressure as our costs continue to rise. I know that when I started 6 years ago, the town budget was roughly only about 2/3 of where it is right now. So it goes up sort of inexorably and continuously. And I think that I'm hoping that I sort of see my role, and I hope that people, I look to question, whether or not the town is spending money on the things that it wants to be and what our priorities are. And that, I think, is an important role for any member of the finance committee to play. That's, I think, it for me. I know I didn't use anywhere near 5 minutes, but that's
that's fine.
That more or less covers it.
That's fine. Other issues will come up, I'm sure, and you can answer more later. The next respondent is Ms. Susan Murphy.
Thank you very much. I prepared a little bio for you, and since it's right in front of me, I'll read that and use that as a springboard for what I want to say. The ink was not dry on my Vassar College degree when I came to the Vineyard in 1972 for my first summer. I taught swimming at the community center and worked at the galley in Menemsha. Except for a year in England that began in the fall of 1972, and a brief stint at the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard, I have lived here year-round ever since. My husband and I raised 2 sons. Together, we had a small marine repair business, and in 1986, we planted 400 blueberry bushes on a piece of property that we had recently purchased and created Murphy Blueberry Farm. Additionally, I worked for the U.S. Postal Service as Barbara Seward's clerk in Menemsha, and eventually as postmaster in Chilmark. Currently, I am the cemetery superintendent at Abel's Hill Cemetery. I have spent my entire adult life in Chilmark. In the 50 years I have lived here, I have been intimately involved in making a living here, and I have watched how life has changed in the last half century. I have served on the Finance Advisory Board since the fall of 2014, and this year I am serving as its chair. I am also a member of the Harbor Advisory Board and am currently serving as president of the Friends of the Chilmark Library. I got involved with the Finance Committee ages ago, it seems, and it has been a bit of a learning curve just to learn the vocabulary of terms, to tell you the truth. It's quite a lingo to digest and understand. It's not anything I thought I would ever be interested in, but I was very interested in being an advocate for the Chilmark Library when I first got involved. And it turns out I became an advocate for other organizations as well, including the Center for Living, which is something that my husband attended while he was ailing. I never in a million years thought of myself as a fiscal conservative, but that's what I find myself on this board. There are 2 of us among the 7 members who would qualify as being quote unquote lifers. The only other person who's been here longer than me is Marshall Carroll, and that's because he's only 53 and he's lived here his entire life. But I think that there is an aspect of Chilmark that is somehow lost these days among its wealthy clientele and fancy real estate houses and Tony neighborhoods and so on and so forth, that there always was a community of people who lived and worked here and made it work. And I feel as if I represent a certain element of Chilmark that somehow is sometimes glossed over. So that is my reason for staying on the Finance Committee. And now that I'm a candidate for re-election as as my first 6 months or so as chair, I really do think that there's a lot that we can do. We've had some very lively discussions this past year with our town fathers, and I think that's very instructive and informative and helpful to have that kind of dialogue with selectmen. Thank you very much. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Bob Rosenbaum.
Good evening, all. My name is Bob Rosenbaum, and I would like to thank the League of Women Voters and MVTV for hosting the Chilmark Advisory Committee Candidates Forum. And also greetings to my fellow candidates, Eric and Susan. I decided to run for FinCom in order to contribute my municipal financial expertise to my town. During my professional career, I was a serial entrepreneur in the high-tech industry. I was one of the founders of 3 different computer networking companies, for which I was responsible for finance and strategic marketing. I started coming to the Vineyard in the 80s, and I've lived in Chilmark since 1999. I've been on the Martha's Vineyard Airport Commission for the past 7 years, starting as the chair of the Finance Committee, where I led the effort to revamp the financial reporting and forecasting system there. I've been the chair of the commission for the past 4 years, during which time the airport has completed many multi-million-dollar capital projects and debt financing. The commission consists of 7 members, and my goal has been to ensure that all commissioners have the opportunity to express their views and work together to ensure the safety of the users and staff of the airport, and to benefit the island as one of the only 2 modes of public transportation to and from the island. I've been an active volunteer in many island organizations. I am passionate about the education of our children, with particular focus in on mathematics. I've been tutoring math in the 2nd and 4th grades in the island schools, and have organized tours of the airport for 4th graders to show them how important math is in every occupation. I was a big brother to an elementary school boy for Big Brother and Big Sisters. I've been a very active volunteer crew member for Habitat for Humanity, where I helped build 5 affordable homes on the island. And I have just recently started working with Healthy Aging MV to bring technology assistance to island seniors. I'm certain my municipal financial experience and commitment to the island would be a benefit to my town of Chilmark. Thank you, and I look forward to answering everybody's questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, the candidates will now have up to 3 minutes to answer each question, and the timekeeper will once again let them know when there's 1 minute remaining. So you pretty much answered the first question, so I'm going to move on to the second one, which is, what skills do you bring to the Finance Committee, and in particular include your experience and knowledge of municipal finance, such as regulations, reporting, and finance? And if you feel you already answered some aspect of that, move on to other parts. And again, you don't have to use the full 3 minutes. This is just a question that came in from the audience, so I'm trying to be respectful of their question. So for the first question, Mr. Glasko, you're first.
Sure. I was well, obviously I have 6 years of experience on the committee, and during which time I have become intimately familiar with the manner in which Chilmark puts together its budget, how we go through our process of deciding what we're going to spend money on and what we don't want to spend money on. I feel quite comfortable and fully versed in, all of the relevant terminology about our sources of funding and the way that we approach the process. In terms of non-municipal finance, I worked for many years as an oil trader and was involved both in the physical movement of oil and in the infrastructure dealing around that. And I've also been running my own small business and including doing all the bookkeeping and accounting for the last 12 years. So I feel quite comfortable with budgets and the budgetary process, and basically having a framework by which you go about and look at these decisions and how does this make sense? Why yes, why no, why now? those sorts of things. So I feel quite comfortable saying that I feel very qualified to, sit on the finance committee and weigh in on these topics.
Thank you. Ms. Murphy?
I have had the experience of being self-employed in Chilmark for a number of years with my husband in our small business. And fundamentally, I understand the principle that you cannot spend what you don't have, and you have to be able to afford what you are planning to purchase. And in Chilmark, it always kind of shocks me a little bit that a lot of the things that department heads ask for seem to be embellishments rather than fundamentals. That is something that I often find distressing in a way, because I realize the numbers have gotten quite large in Chilmark. Traditionally, towns spend most of their money on their schools, as it should be. And that is the case in Chilmark. I am a very strong advocate for keeping a school in Chilmark and very strongly support what we do in Chilmark. I was the chairman of the school building committee 20 some years ago when we did build the new school, and it was quite a process. So my credentials may not be in the financial world, but I did run a post office and I was very familiar with the budget process. That isn't exactly what I think I bring to the table here. I think what I bring is an understanding and a common sense of traditionally what Chilmark has been and what it is, and where our values are. So in that regard, I think that is something that comes from having spent a lot of time here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Rosenbaum?
Thank you. As I've indicated, I have a great deal of experience both in business-related finance as well as municipal finance. I've been very involved in all of the various budgeting associated with the airport and with the county. Also in terms of getting grants for a lot of the projects involved. So I think I've already sort of laid everything out, and I also do my own taxes. So money is and budgets are something I'm very familiar with, very comfortable with, and being able to take a critical eye on looking at budgets and the expenditures, and that's I will end it there.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what are your thoughts on cost distribution among towns for the renovation or replacement of the high school? Mr. Rosenbaum, could you please answer first?
Sure. Well, that's a very good question, and one that is currently obviously of very big importance. I indicated big advocate of education, and particularly education here on the island. I think the high school is of critical importance to being able to educate our youth and keep the families here. And I am very concerned about getting the financing for the high school, and both in terms of the capital improvement that needs to go on and just the ongoing funding of it. And it's a real problem with what's going on with 6 towns and the negotiations among the towns. And I realize each town, and I certainly understand Chilmark's position regards to both funding the operating as well as the capital budgets of the high school, and think we somehow really need to come to an understanding and reasonable people sitting down. And I really believe and hope that can come about. I believe there are solutions to this. I have spent a lot of time in the airport while I've been a commissioner and working with situations where there have been a lot of conflict initially, and being able to sit down and come to an agreement and that works for everybody. And I would really hope, and I would certainly be willing to volunteer, either whether I'm on the FinCom or not, to work to that goal.
Thank you. Mr. Glasko.
I think that obviously the high school represents an enormous capital investment, the largest capital investment that the island's going to be facing for the foreseeable future. It obviously, as Bob pointed out, it's a very contentious issue. It seems to me that the funding the ongoing operation of the high school for the operating costs on a sort of per pupil basis, the way we've been doing it, is very fair and makes sense. It also seems to me that funding the bond obligation, the long-term capital expenses via a different formula that speaks to the differences in assessed value across the different towns also makes some sense. And I think it's obviously there are some absolutist positions out there amongst the various towns, but it seems to me that there is and should be a compromise to be had, whereby Chilmark does step up and take a bigger, frankly speaking, accept a somewhat larger portion of the cost of building a new school than would be represented by our enrollment. But it seems to me that it also makes a lot of sense that we continue to fund the ongoing enrollment of the schools on a per pupil basis.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Murphy?
There are 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard, each with distinct qualities, characteristics, personalities, etc. Thinking regionally has always been a difficult concept, particularly when it comes to money. And I happen to know 3 of the 5 Oak Bluff selectmen. And I spoke with one of them not too long ago regarding the fact that just saying no isn't enough. You look like the spoilers. There are 5 towns that agree, and you're the town that doesn't agree. You need to come up with something that gets the conversation started. And the conversation got started not from Oak Bluffs, but from Chilmark. Jim Melkin came up with a solution that seemed very viable, and it again was just turned down by Oak Bluffs. Having said that, I realize that the town leaders are sitting down and trying to hammer out an agreement. I think they all struggle with the need that just because one town has more students and holds the high school and the hospital and the YMCA and the hockey rink and community services, they are unduly burdened with the cost per pupil, the way we've figured this system out. Now, the formula was devised years ago. The Vineyard has changed a lot in those years. And I am really glad that they are sitting down and talking about this, and that I am hopeful and very optimistic that we will come up with an agreement that will more equitably spread the burden of a new building. That's my position. It's not particularly favorable to Chilmark because it will mean, I agree with Eric, we will have to pay more, but I think in the end, it's the right thing.
Okay, well, the next question was somewhat related. So if you want to embellish any more, fine. And if you think you've already made your statement, we can just move on. But the next question was, what are your thoughts about the high school funding formula? And do you believe Chilmock's share of the high school budget is fair and equitable? And you answered it a little bit, but if you want to say more about that, fine. And the first person would be Ms. Murphy.
Well, I just will elaborate briefly. I think capital expenses could be more equitably shared. And I think that there is a certain burden of program that does depend on enrollment of the number of students. That to me seemed like a good way to break it down to begin with. But I think that we need the building, whether or not we send 2 children or 200 children to the high school. So I think it's important that we look at sharing the capital expenses a little more equitably.
Okay, and next, Mr. Glasko.
Yeah, I agree with Susan and with what I said earlier. It seems to me that the capital expenses should need to be addressed in a different way than the ongoing operating expenses, without doubt.
Okay, and Mr. Rosenbaum.
I will make this unanimous in terms of the capital costs. I think what Jim Malcolm did was a very positive move in terms of moving the conversation along. I think also if we look at the role the high school plays on the island and how Chilmark is really dependent on the workers from Oak Bluffs and Tisbury and so forth, the plumbers, the electricians and so forth, that there may be a way to look at the actual ongoing operating costs that might work out in a better manner for everybody on the island. Again, I think it's critically important that the high school remain a viable and well-funded organization. I understand where Oak Bluffs is coming from. I'm not thrilled with the way they have necessarily gone about expressing their views on the matter. But again, I think if reasonable people can sit down and work this out, that it will benefit all 6 towns on the island and all the students in the Martha's Vineyard school system.
Thank you. The next question is, please comment on the Up Island School District budget, including your thoughts for funding the Chilmark School. Mr. Glasko?
Well, I'll start with the second part. I mean, I think that both of my kids attended the Chilmark School. I think it's a tremendous asset to the town, and it is, you know, we don't have a lot of a huge number of institutions in our town or places where people congregate and so forth. And so I think having a Chilmark school is critically important in terms of maintaining, you know, frankly speaking, the lifeblood of the town. Having young families and having a sense of community is in large part driven by our school. And so I would, you know, always advocate that we maintain the Chilmark School as an ongoing entity. As far as the Up Island school, as far as the budget of the Up Island Regional School District as a whole, you know, we have been facing a number of cost increases, which are, you know, in large part to a certain extent out of our hands. We have limited ability in terms of being able to respond to the need for residential placements and things like that really have pretty strong impacts on the budget here for the Up Island Regional School District and so forth. I know there was a lot of controversy in the past year. There have been a lot of debate. Those debates really center around a little bit of, I mean, I think issues that are, well, are understood by the finance committee. There's certainly complicated issues as to whether or not we need to be paying for our stuff out of E&D funds or other areas. In general, I think that we're finding a good answer, but it's a very complicated problem, and it's certainly not easy or obvious. The answers are not clear cut in my mind.
Okay, Mr. Rosenbaum?
I believe that the Chilmark School is clearly a valuable part of the town. It is been here for a lot of years, and obviously a lot of the people in town have sent their children there, as well as many of the adults and grandparents have gone to the Chilmark School. So it is a reality, and there's no question it will continue to be here. By the same token, I think I know there are people who are from Chilmark who are sending their children to the West Tisbury School. And all of the Chilmark students, once they leave the Chilmark School, go to the West Tisbury School. So that is an important part. And I think, there's certainly been a lot of discussions back and forth about the Up Island School budget and so forth. But overall, from my observations, I think they have been worked out fairly reasonably. And once again, I think reasonable people can sit down and continue to work that out.
Thank you. Ms. Murphy?
The Up Island Regional School District was formed about 25 years ago, and it has a pretty solid track record for success. Well, there are two schools in the district, the West Tisbury School and the Chilmark School. Each is owned by its own town. And the capital expenses are absorbed 80% by the town that owns the school, and 20%, 10 from each of the other two towns, 10 from West Tisbury and 10 from Aquina in the case of repairs to the Chilmark School. Interestingly, over the years, there has often been the discussion of it costs too much to have the Chilmark School. That has been analyzed. And interestingly, when there are 60 students in the Chilmark School, the cost is no different from sending a student to the West Tisbury School. The costs even out at that point. And I believe there are 59 students in the Chilmark School as we speak. It was a 6-classroom school design 25 years ago. And it was thought that it was too big. In fact, there are still people around town who think that it was built with state money because it was so big. And I can honestly tell you, we looked into that, and the only way we could qualify for state money was if we built a much bigger school, including a cafeteria, a library, and a gym. And the whole idea was to make it so that we utilized what we had and we kept the school in the center of town. And I think we succeeded in doing that. And there are expenses. For example, we have big HVAC upgrades that need to be done to the Chilmark School. That's expensive. A lot has to do with the standards for public buildings 25 years ago and how they were built. It's better now, but the process is flawed, in my opinion, because they always seem to have to take the lowest bid. However, having said that, we hold our own. In fact, there are now demands on the space in the school that the principal is looking to utilize that 6th classroom for the K-5 program, as opposed to its preschool, which it houses. So I think the Chilmark School is alive and well and very important in the Up Island Regional School District. It offers a choice, and that choice is quite evident. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next question. Question number 1 on the Chilmark ballot is, shall the town vote to have its elected treasurer become an appointed treasurer? What are your thoughts on this question, Mr. Rosenbaum?
Well, that's a big question. I know the county just dealt with that. I know some of the other, I believe it was West Tisbury, and Tisbury went through a similar process. In general, my sense is that probably an elected, rather an appointed treasurer would be the best option. Treasurer is one of those positions that is very technical, and from a voter's standpoint, I don't think most of the voters really have the qualifications to go and select a treasurer. So my position would be an appointed treasurer would be the best option.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Murphy.
I asked around to people involved in the town hall, what are your thoughts on this? And essentially, I concur with Bob. The job is technical, and it involves someone who has background and qualifications. And the idea that somebody could decide for whatever reason that they wanted the job and run and perhaps win the position and then have to learn on the job is quite challenging. So the consensus in the town hall among the people who work there was that whether it's an elected or an appointed position, that is not so definitive as the qualifications of the person who takes on the responsibility of treasurer, and the interview process and the examining of qualifications and so on is something that would not be a part of the elected process. So this is one job where I really feel strongly that probably an appointed treasurer does make sense.
Thank you. Mr. Glasko.
I would agree with the most of the sentiments that have been previously expressed. It seems to me it's a technical job, and it makes much more sense to be able to properly vet potential candidates or applicants for the job to make sure that we're getting somebody who's fully versed and qualified in the ins and outs of municipal finance and what you need to know, rather than potentially ending up with someone who is less than fully qualified for the job because they got elected.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is your position on the proposed housing bank? Ms. Murphy.
Now, this is the project that is about, the housing bank, I'm sorry. Well, I listened to the presentation. I'm intimately familiar with the land bank's legislation, enabling legislation, and its mission. And the fact that the housing bank was patterned on the land bank's structure has made me quite happy, because it is a functioning commission. It works. And there's no question, but the other thing I want to say is, having said that, the land bank is not by law allowed to divert its funds for housing. And this is what the quick fix is for a lot of people. I understand that that is not the case. And so a housing bank is a good idea. It also has what I learned was a sunset clause, which means at the end of 30 years, it works itself out of business unless there is a need to continue. And that is reassuring, because with the 2% fee on a real estate transaction, a lot of money is raised very quickly. And the thing that I was concerned about is this just another fund for more building on the vineyard? And the answer is no. I believe it's like 60% of their funds will go to buildings that are already in existence. So it doesn't mean we're going to have another surge of building on the vineyard. And that made me happy. So I will support the housing bank when it comes for a vote on Wednesday.
Thank you. Mr. Glasko.
I am supportive of, I feel as a local business person who employs quite a number of year-round people, many of whom struggle with housing. I'm supportive of the housing bank, although I have to say, personally, I have a little bit of a philosophical gripe in the sense that I think that collectively, both the town of Chilmark and the island as a whole should probably be, this is something that we should be paying for out of our, regular budget. Now that's difficult and painful to do, and to say that we're going to allocate funds out of our existing tax base. The truth of the matter is the vast majority of people are, I'm probably, unlikely to pay into, I may never pay into the housing bank personally, because I may never sell my property in the next 30 years before it's sunset. So I think that is somewhat of an issue. I think if we face housing, if housing is a profound issue for the island, which I think it is, we ought to have the courage to address it sort of more head on, in the sense that we be able to tax all of the stakeholders or find sources of revenue that really touch everybody to pay for what is a problem that ultimately affects all of us in one way or another.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosenbaum.
I am an enthusiastic supporter of the housing bank.
Done. That was the answer. Okay, thank you, all three of you, on that question. Next, are there other island-wide financial issues you would like to comment on? Mr. Rosenbaum.
Well,
That Chilmark would obviously, Chilmark, it's things that impact Chilmark, but they're island-wide issues.
I think we've sort of addressed the big elephant in the room, and that's from the education standpoint and the high school. I think that's probably the biggest nut we have to deal with in the near future.
Okay, Ms. Murphy.
Well, aside from the high school, which I think we addressed, I have heard some people discuss regionalizing, for example, the police force, that there's so much money wasted on salaries and personnel with each individual town having its own police force. I'm not sure I'm ready to give up that local control. I'm not sure. Let me think about other issues that for example, the sheriff's position of trying to get a communication link that works in all towns, all 6 towns. That's not quite ironed out. I would like to see it happen, and I would like to see it happen smoothly so that all of our fire, police, and EMS people have the same communications link. That's a regional thing. Management of the town forest, or the state forest rather. I worry sometimes about the danger of fire and the underbrush and things like that. Are we equipped to handle an island-wide emergency like that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, not because I doubt, it's just that I just don't know. So, but there are issues that we could talk about, but At this point, I think the big one is the high school, and I really hope that we can think more regionally on that one.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Glasko?
I would agree with what Susan just said. The high school is head and shoulders the most important regional sort of question that I think that we are facing as from a financial perspective. I think there's philosophical questions about regionality and whether or not we ought to sort of be thinking about combining certain things. But I don't, frankly speaking, I don't think those concerns are really sort of too front of, they're not sort of right at the front of consideration. So I don't think that those are things that are really come anywhere near the level of importance of finding an equitable solution to how we're funding education going forward.
Okay, so the next question is, was there a question you thought I might ask that I haven't asked yet? Ms. Murphy, you sort of thought I might ask about something, but I haven't yet. So what is that question and what do you think about it?
Well, I'm more relaxed now than I was when I started. I realize I've spent a lot of time dealing with some of these issues. I thought maybe you might ask about the development issues in Chilmark, the things that the big ticket items that we have coming up. And I have a couple of them that are right at the top of my list. For example, EMS and fire building. That's right off the bat, we had to get $1.2 million more just to get the process started. That's a big expense. The high school we've already covered. The town is planning some affordable housing units up off Tabor House Road. I don't think we've even gotten to a price tag or even a discussion other than an agreement in principle as to what we want there. That's going to be a big ticket item. There are issues in Menempsha that the dock will need to be upgraded and repaired. We need a new comfort station without question. As I said in the final, I think it was the last hearing we had for the Finance Committee, if you thought of Chilmark as a family, we have children who need to go to college. And these are what we need to be thinking about as we go forward. These are the big ticket items that we're facing. And there are many people in town who, though we may all be millionaires on paper because of our land value, we don't necessarily have the same number of zeros in our income as we do on our tax bills. So that's a concern of mine. That's something that I really think sometimes people don't recognize that those are still issues for some of us. And that's why it's important to have people like me on the Finance Committee. I remind you that there are those of us who still live and work here.
Okay. Mr. Glasko.
I thought you might ask more of a philosophical or existential question about if there's any sort of overriding question or ethos or something like, as someone who's been on the Finance Committee for the past several years, whether there's anything that why would I want to be on the committee going forward? What is it that I might want to do or accomplish if elected to another term? And the answer to that is, I think I tried this year a little bit to steer. Oftentimes there's I think inertia is an enormously powerful force in town government and town budgeting. We have a tendency to look at things through the lens of what was historically done or what has been done in the last year. Oftentimes we're looking at, how much money we have and what did we spend money on last year? And then what if we do the same thing again, what's the impact on the budget? And perhaps not being as we are not being as, we're not looking as critically as I think we ought to year in, year out about whether or not we ought to continue to be doing certain things, or examining whether or not this is, yes, we've done it this way, but is this still an appropriate way for us to be, to be recommending to the town that the town meeting spend its dollars, and spend the tax revenues. And I think that, I think that that's something that is a struggle for really all of the members of the Finance Committee, frankly, is to figure out what exactly that role is, and how much deference is paid to what historically has been done versus what we think ought to be done going forward.
Mr. Rosenbaum.
I think you've done a wonderful job of coming up with all of the questions, and no, I don't have any other
Burning issue
in terms of what you might have asked.
So I'm going to go back to what Ms. Murphy brought up, which is sort of, you've got a lot of big ticket items that are going to be on the table in the next year or two. And the housing one, I know you have a huge amount of money in your housing funds that can be used for building some of that housing. Because I'm on the CPC where I live, and I know that you also have quite a bit of housing money for CPC. But the other issues that you talked about, including the fire station, Menemsha, fixing up the dock, whether or not you need a new comfort station, all those things. So I guess I would ask how you might, as you look forward, because those are issues that are going to be coming up. What are your thoughts on those, Mr. Glasko?
My thoughts are, there are going to be some, we are going to be facing some probably not insignificant tax increases in the coming years if the town is not interested in fundamentally, saying like, hey, we want to address some of these questions. And they are super difficult, painful questions. And I don't necessarily want to pick on any one particular area, but there are areas of the town budget that have ballooned quite considerably over the course of just the last 5 or 6 years that I've been on the committee. And these are really tough things to ask, like, do we want to continue to pay for this level of service? We've seen, I've been living here in Chelmark for 12 years, and there's a lot more services that are provided by the town that were not previously provided when we moved here a dozen years ago. And if the town thinks that these things, if the voters, frankly speaking, think that these things are important, then I suppose we'll go forward and pay for them. But if not, I suspect we'll have to make some really difficult choices. And I kind of see my role as standing up and saying like, hey, is this what we want to do? What I don't like is the idea that we would just continue to go along and follow that inertial path without actually being able to think critically about whether or not it's what we should be doing, or whether it's what we want to positively do as opposed to simple what we're doing out of habit.
Okay, Mr. Rosenbaum?
Well, like with anything, any budget, you've got to go and look at how much and what the projects are that you need to do. So to go about doing that, including looking at the time frame for various things. You can't do everything. You've got to schedule them out and do the appropriate planning in terms of when you want to go about doing these things and how critical they are, the individual projects are. And there also, you need to look at alternate sources of funding. The taxes aren't necessarily the only way of going about it. There are lots of grants, both from a federal and a state sources of funding for many projects. We've certainly seen that at the airport, and so it's really a matter of that's what you have to do. You have to take a hard look at everything and put a filter on what you want to accomplish, how much it's going to cost, and what the general feeling with the voters happens to be to proceed with any particular project. Clearly, all of the issues that have been brought up, what's going on in Menemsha, the docks are all big issues. The fire station is already in progress. We've got to go ahead. It's critical. We need a new fire station, along with bays for the ambulance. So that's the job of the finance committee, to do the hard work of making the recommendations to the town meeting on budget expenditures.
Thank you. Ms. Murphy.
Well, I will be specific. I think that an awful lot of things get approved and get passed in the name of public safety. And ever since we've decided to have 24/7 EMS coverage, that's one budget, for example, that you can count on it getting bigger and bigger every year. Now, granted, under the leadership of the current head of the EMS department, he's done a tremendous job in getting reimbursements that are due from insurance companies, and that's been huge. I mean, that's really helped. But I find that I listen to the budgets being presented every year, and there's always some new gimmick, or there's always some new device that we just have to have, because I mean, without it, something awful is going to happen. And I sit and listen, and I guess I've lived here too long. I mean, I remember the old days when you'd call the police and they take you down to the hospital in the back of the cruiser. And but I mean, there always seems to be a pressing need in the departmental budgets of one more thing. And sometimes I think people ask just because they may get turned down, but then again, they may get what they want. So I find that a little unsettling when I listen to the budgets. I think of some of the requests as being just a little off the wall sometimes. And so I usually say so. And sometimes I win and sometimes I don't, but I bring it up anyway, because I think at the end of the day, it's not just the town of Chilmark and we're so wealthy and we can afford this and all this other kind of stuff. But I mean, it's people like me who pay taxes. And to tell you the truth, next to my mortgage, my tax bill is a big one. So that's what I like to keep in mind. I mean, I like to at least say, do you really need this? I mean, do we really need one more golf cart or one more drone or one more shed to keep the jet ski in? I mean, it goes on and on. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of my official questions. So now we're going to move to the closing remarks, and you have a few minutes to make your closing remarks. So if there's something I didn't ask, or you really wanted to say, or there was anything else that we didn't cover yet that you really wanted to include, including more of Mr. Glasko's comments about, I think you call them the philosophical issues and all of those kind of things. So if there's something else you wanted to include that you think would be important for voters to know about you, or some other thought that you haven't had a chance to say, or comment on something else, this is your chance. So Mr. Rosenbaum, you're first.
Thank you. One of the things that I did think about, and I realize that that R word, regionalization, is a very difficult word to deal with on the island, but I agree that I think the various police forces should remain in the towns that they are familiar with. But there is one particular issue that I think should be dealt with regionally, and that's the wastewater issues. It is a critical issue around the entire island. All of the towns are dealing with this. We're dealing with this at the airport right now. And I think that is an opportunity for all 6 towns to get together and determine what the future of our wastewater processing is going to be. And I realize the Up Island towns all have septic systems, and the Down Island towns all have wastewater facilities. But this is something that's in fact affecting everybody on the island in terms of how this is going to be dealt with. So that would be one thing I would really advocate for, having a strong regional discussion going forward. Other than that, I would just once again like to emphasize, I think I have a very good background and could contribute an immense amount to the Finance Committee, and look forward to serving my town, and would like to wish my fellow candidates good luck.
Thank you. Ms. Murphy?
I can honestly say in the 8 years I've been involved with the Finance Committee, I've learned a lot. I've learned how a town government is financed. I've learned how things move through a budget process. And I'm beginning to feel comfortable with the lingo and the process and the players and the issues. And it took a while to get this level of expertise. And I look forward to serving another term and making myself useful to the town with what I've learned over the last 8 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Glasko?
First, before in case I forget it, thank everybody for organizing this and taking the time, and appreciate the other 2 candidates and everybody. I would just say that, I mean, I have found the process to be both interesting and instructive, and like Susan, I've learned a lot over the years. I think that for myself, I think I bring, you know, a pretty unique set of life experiences to what I mean to the table. And I also think I bring a, you know, as someone who still has a child in the school system and still has you know, a little bit of a younger you know, take on things. I think I bring a nice balance to the board. And I would, you know, be honored if the voters of Chilmark wanted to return me to that position again. So thanks again, everybody.
Well, thank you all. In particular, I would like to thank the candidates for participating in the forum, and in particular with this odd format of doing it on Zoom. It is so bizarre, and it would be so much nicer if we could be together and have people asking you questions, and you could see each other in person and all that. So hopefully next year. I would like to thank you for running for office. Your willingness to serve the town and the island is greatly appreciated. And again, we hope it will be next year in person. We also want to thank MVTV, our own cable television station here on the Vineyard, and executive assistant for the MVC, Lucy Morrison, who is coordinating this virtual gathering so we can provide this live link on TV On channel 15 is where you will be able to see it. It can be streamed for later viewing between now and town election. I want to remind you of two important dates. Your town meeting will take place on April 25th, 7 p.m. at the Chilmark Center, and your town election will be held April 27th. The polls will be open from noon to 8 p.m. at the community center. Absentee ballots are available on the Chilmark Town website or in town office. The last day and hour to apply for a mailed absentee ballot for the annual town election is Thursday, April 21. So that's coming right up at 5 p.m. And the last day and hour to apply for an in-person absentee ballot for the annual town election is Tuesday, April 26th at 12 noon. And I remind people that you cannot get an absentee ballot for town meeting, which people are a little confused about. They don't realize you have to show up. So now it's up to the voters to decide. And again, good evening and thank you for all participating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.